everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. Good episode today. I'm going to be very quick with this intro. I'm sick. I don't think it's COVID. Here's the deal. I went to an Emmys party. Naomi is on Mythic Quest, so we were invited to the Apple Emmys party on Monday. Both of us wearing masks. However, did take the mask off once in a while to eat an hors d'oeuvre. They were good. Not great. Mother Wolf. It's, a trendy restaurant here in Los Angeles. But, the food was fine. I think you're paying for the ambiance. Or you're paying to be at a quote-unquote hip restaurant if you go eat there. But I don't know. I don't know how long I'm double boosted. I don't know how long it takes to get infected with Omicron or BA5 or whatever. But I've taken 2 rapid tests so far, and they both are unequivocally not COVID. So that's what I hate about this thing, is that it's like, I don't know, do I just have a cold? I didn't sleep very well last week. Do I just have a cold? Is this allergies? Anyway. I'm going to be very brief now. Today's episode is great. This is Laura Veirs. If you don't know who she is, I'm going to read you her bio right now. Originally from Colorado Springs, musician Laura Veirs first thought she was going to follow her family into the sciences. However, an artistic life called to her, and in 1999, she released her first self-titled album. Since then, she has released almost a dozen more albums, become an international success, and recorded with Nico Case and Katie Lang as Case Lang Veirs, which is great. Her latest album, Found Light, was just released this summer on Raven Marching Band. It's great. I love it. This is good. I don't think I cracked Laura exactly, but we did talk about some interesting things, and she was very game to go down the path that the show builds from, I guess. So that was very delightful. It's always nice when the guests are like, yeah, okay, I'll go along with this game. But I thought it was a very nice talk. We do get into a lot of science and art stuff, which are deeply entwined in my existential profile. So I like that. And I love Laura's music a lot. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, what I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like. If you've never heard Beginnings before and you're like, okay, this was good, I'll check out some other episodes. I talk to hundreds of people from very different walks of the arts. Let's chalk this up to brain fog that I may or may not have due to COVID. But look, I'll be honest, my natural state is kind of brain foggy, so I really can't slough the responsibility off onto being sick. Anyway, I've talked to hundreds of people from comedy and writing and books and music. But here, okay, Laura's a musician. What about some other musicians I've talked to recently that may be of interest to you? Why Carl Blau, who plays with Laura in her live band, or Kevin Barnes from Of Montreal, Julie Doiron, John Vanderslice. All very good talks, so check those out. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. If you can, write a review. I haven't asked for those really in like 10 or 11 years. And I just started to again. I'm like, oh, maybe I should ask people, because it does help strangers find the show on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcast now. So if you have like 2 seconds and can write a 5-star review, that would be of help. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman, and I've got some awesome episodes coming up, including Katie Davidson, aka Dear Nora. They were wonderful. Kieran Gillen, great comic book writer who is currently doing the X-Men Avengers Eternals crossover. That is just absolutely great. Probably the best crossover I've read in a long time. Today I just talked to Robin Holcomb, who is, basically one of the founders. She balked when I said founders of the downtown New York art scene, but I would say she is. And that was a really cool talk. So look forward to those. But for now, let's talk to Laura. paranoia. Yeah, that's my emotional state.
Yeah, I get that.
I imagine that's like your daily emotional state with children, but
Yeah, for sure. Like one of them's wandering around Oaks Park, which is this amusement park right now with his friend. I'm like, okay, enjoy. He's 12 and a half though. So, I mean, they can get into all kinds of trouble, but he's fairly responsible. His friend, not so much. So we'll see what happens. But he usually tells me the stories like, well, they're waiting outside the amusement park for people to come out. And then they're going to they're going to ask if they could have their wristbands so they don't have to pay to get in.
Okay. Hold on. Let me go back for a second. Are you okay? When I hung out, none of my friends were like real, what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say mischief makers. I think mischief makers was like, we didn't drink, we didn't do drugs. It was just like, we just had fun around the neighborhood. But my parents, they were still like, they didn't like mischief. So they kept an eye on me, even with my friends who were like doing a little more mischief than I would have done on my own. And you seem, I don't know. Are you okay with your friend, with your child's friend being a mischief maker? Does that egg your son, daughter, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. He is so far my son is not influenced by this kid in a negative way yet. And I think my son is interested in watching his friend who does stuff like steal. And then he'll tell me he stole from Fred Meyer. He stole gum and like drinks today. And I'll be like, oh, did you steal anything? He says, no. I'm like, good. Stealing's wrong. Why is stealing wrong? And they'll go through it. And then we looked, and then he started stealing more stuff. The other kid, like thrift store clothes. And I was like, okay, he's escalating his stealing. And I had told the parents that my son had told me that this kid was stealing. And they did talk with him, but he kept escalating. And I was like, it's only a matter of time before he gets caught. So let's look up what the consequences are for him getting caught. And my son's like, he's not going to get caught. He's super stealth. I'm like, he's going to get caught. Like, it's a game. He's playing a game and he's testing authority. And he feels like, I think he feels a little bit out of control at his house. He's testing his parents' boundaries. He's testing boundaries and he's going to get caught. So we looked into the consequences and they're really severe, actually, if you have multiple theft penalties. You can even go into the foster system if you do it enough times because your parents aren't helping you stop stealing, So anyway, my son is learning all about this stuff with me behind the scenes and I think explaining maybe some of it to his friend, but I appreciate so much that he talks to me and we have a very open communication style right now. And he's 12 and a half, almost 13. Like that's the zone where I've noticed some of my friends' kids are stopping talking to them altogether. And so I'm like just knocking on wood that I can maintain this open communication and also with the younger one who is 9, who's always listening in on all the conversations and, picking it all up and seeing what's going on. And so we're very open in my house and I have my kids 85% of the time for our parenting plan. So after my divorce, I have them most of the time. So we're really, and the pandemic, it just made this bond that's really tight. And I hope that we can keep that. I know it can get fractured in the teen years, but I'm really hoping it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Are there things that you thought about when you first had children that you're like, my parents did this, so I'm not going to do X, whatever that is, or my parents did Y, and I liked that and I thought it was useful, so I want to do that?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, that's probably happening all the time, whether I'm thinking about it or not. But yeah, I think my parents were fairly achievement oriented and my brother and I were high achievers. And I always felt pressure to do that. And I think it's served me well in some ways, but also made me feel like that's just my only worth is like being amazing at something, And so I don't want to impart to them that perfectionist, overachieving kind of culture. And so but I do want to model finding meaning in your life. And my parents modeled that. They find a lot of meaning in their life through, my dad's an environmentalist, and they're both educators, and they found tons of meaning that way. And also meaning in helping me and my brother understand the world in a very hands-on way. My parents were really hands-on. So I appreciate all of that. And that's stuff that I do try to perpetuate. So it's like, we all have things that happen in our childhood that we don't want to repeat or we wouldn't want to saddle our children with. And then I think we hopefully all have some stuff we would want to pay forward.
Yeah. The high achieving thing really resonates with me. And I think a lot of my adult life has been, this is going to sound very dumb, but like trying to get out from under the kind of Pavlovian pats on the head and gold stars for doing well, because I think that motivated a lot of my actions. And I'm curious if that has been a similar path for you.
Yeah, I think for sure that's been part of my, certainly probably a lot of my psychology through my early years and I felt like I had to prove myself as a musician to my family, because they're all like Stanford doctors and stuff, like they're all like high achieving PhDs. And so I felt like, well, and my mom kept asking me for years until my mid-30s, when are you going to get a different job? And she wasn't saying it in a mean way. She's like, you could be a teacher, because she was a teacher. That's just what she knows, And so, but I definitely had a chip on my shoulder. Like, I want to prove to these people that I can do this thing that's super hard to do, which is make a living at your art, at being a musician. So now, I mean, now they're proud of me and they don't ask me that question anymore. But it's not that they weren't proud of me before. They were always super supportive. They're amazing people, my whole family. But I think I wanted to prove to them, and also this boyfriend I had once who was like, you'll never make a living at music. And I think he wasn't saying it because I suck. He was just like, that's impossible. It's not a dream. It's not a dream someone should try for, So I think that motivated me too, What
did that guy do?
He's kind of an acquaintance. He's super nice. He's actually a climate change scientist. So he's doing cool work around that. But he didn't go into the arts, I don't think he wanted to take the risk because it's risky.
I mean, have you struggled with that? Like, there are marks of distinction in the arts, right? You can get like a good review on Pitchfork, or you can win awards or whatever, right? There are certain marks of distinction, right? Or, the praise of people you look up to, that kind of stuff. But it's still like, there are things I've made that got those kind of things, and there's things I've made that didn't, but that I thought were just as good. And I think it's been for me at least, it's been kind of a struggle to get out from like the same kind of enlightenment kind of things. Like, you can rank everything in a hierarchy, and there's a definite, like, this work of art is like, we can essentialize it and make it a thing, right? Like the kind of stuff that you might, and parenthetically, I have a background in philosophy of science, as well as writing and making music and stuff like that. And so I find that it's very difficult sometimes to reconcile both of those. One side, which is very empirical, and one side, which isn't. And parentheses. So I'm curious if you've had that struggle, both this kind of struggle with getting out from underneath these marks of distinction, and with kind of like reconciling those things, the way you're brought up, if that makes any sense as a question.
I would say, I try to find the meaning of what I'm doing that goes beyond those things, like pats on the back from Pitchfork or mom and dad or whoever else. Like my ex was my producer for 20 years, and I always wanted his approval before we went forward with anything. He was always like the curator of the songs and albums and stuff. very heavily involved with every creative decision. So that's why this new record is special for me. But I definitely, I noticed early on when I started getting reviews for Carbon Glacier, which was in 2004, it started getting some big press in the UK. And that was pretty unexpected. And I had never had a review before. So I read those reviews. And even though they were glowing, they kind of messed with my head. They were like making me think like, oh, I should do this again. Because they liked that, like kind of it made me feel like I was pandering to the reviewer or fans in my mind when I was writing the next thing. So I was like, I don't think some artists read their reviews and some don't. Some will read them after the project is done, like a year later, just to try to learn. And I've opted for only reading like one or two per album cycle and just being more like, I guess, like aesthetic or like a almost religious or something, just sort of staying away from all that so that I can stay tuned into what it is that I'm trying to say, independent of all of this noise. And the noise is so like loud now too, and with social media and everything, you could get lost in conversations with people on DMs, like random people. The internet is vast, and like you could spend all your time thinking about what they're saying versus like centering and slowing down and asking yourself, what do I want to say and how do I want to say it independent of this noise? And it's tough. Like I teach songwriting and I think so much of what allows people to continue, and I would say I'm one of them because I've been at this so long, is some kind of there has to be something within you that brings you really deep satisfaction and meaning to keep going with this. And because otherwise it can just send you off the rails in various different ways. And for me, like staying off the internet and like not checking my phone too much and not worrying too much about reviews or like status and all of that has helped me maintain my focus, which, as we all know, the internet the way it is now, is super hard to keep that deep focus. And sometimes I frankly just let it all go and just like binge watch Netflix and like get back to 500 people on Instagram and post a bunch. And then I'm like really in it for a while. And then I'm like, that's great. And that's a part of life. And that can be fun. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to do your writing work, which is the core of what I'm doing, you can't do that stuff. You have to go inward. You can't be listening to like 900 albums. Like you have to listen to yourself.
Yeah, it's a dialectic between Twitter and whatever's happening inside your body. And you can bounce back and forth. I guess what I'm curious about is, do you feel like you are a whole person? I ask that because it took a while for me to go from, like, I would have trouble going from this empirical scientific kind of thinking. And I asked that because you did study science. You were geology, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I had trouble moving from that to like a more playful. If I was in one mode or the other, I was fine in that mode. But it was the boundary between those two modes of being that I had real trouble traversing. And then I've come to, and I don't know if this is universal for people who make things or if it's just my own experience, but like I've come to this kind of feeling where I'm like, oh, I'm in this play mode all the time, and you can still access the empirical stuff through that. And I feel like more of a whole person now. And
that's good.
I don't know if that's been your experience at all or not, but I'm curious.
Yeah, no, it's not been hard for me to switch back and forth. I think that's probably one of my greatest strengths as a creative person. Because like, in the creative process, whether it's I'm like working on visual arts and I've done like quilting and a podcast and poetry and other stuff too. But of course, music and songwriting has been the main thing. But like somehow it's not that hard for me to access that childlike mind. That's like the the playful mind you're talking about, and just live there for a while. And then, and like, I've noticed that, like, because I'm a really busy mom, I'll be like thinking about things while I'm like washing dishes and stuff. So there's like downtime. There's like this liminal space I live in sometimes when I'm doing chores, where I'm thinking about like, oh, that would be the right way. Like, I'm solving problems that would, like, I call it the side eye. I'm just looking at these creative problems sideways while doing other things, going for a run, driving kids somewhere. I can kind of like have half my mind on it and be solving it as I'm doing other things. And I have so many responsibilities. I have a lot of things I need to keep doing, but I find it helpful. Like, even taking, like, I'll be 50 in a year, and almost a year. So I'm like, I like to take a daily nap. And in that nap zone is also when I've noticed that I'm doing a lot of problem solving.
Yeah, 100%.
That dreamlike childlike problem solving, not the science problem solving. That's the editor that comes in later and super critical and like just like cut out all the bullshit. That's the science brain. And then but the artistic brain is like doing a lot of work in the night too. Like, I'll wake up sometimes and write lyrics, and then I'll just spend. So, and then when I do go into the creative realm, it's not always like this. I have plenty of times where I can't get there to that deeper, more fun creative place. But usually, if I've spent enough time resting and refilling my cup, I can do that.
Yeah. That kind of like living in the peripheral space, like the either just waking up or as I'm falling asleep is where I solve a lot of script problems. Yeah,
I can totally relate to that. And I heard I was doing another podcast interview with someone recently, and he said, I think it was Dali, the painter. He said that he would hold, I think it was a spoon, and sit in a chair and fall asleep. And when the spoon dropped, that's when he started painting. And I thought that was so cool. Like, get to that place where you're almost not conscious and you're in this, your mind is really in a different space, and then begin your creation. I thought that was very interesting and relatable.
Yeah.
And also why, like, some people use drugs to create, but I don't. I'm not one of them.
Yeah, me neither. Now, is this the way you were raised? Like, were you raised in a household where like the empirical and the artistic were all kind of wrapped up in one thing?
Yes. And that is something I would attribute to the mix of my mama and my dad. So my mom was and is an artist, a weaver, and just very creative person, creative in the kitchen, loves visual arts, and like always took us like to art classes, and there's always art classes happening, or like she's doing art projects at home with us. And then my dad is the science guy. So he would always be like showing us the stars and like all the constellations, because he was an astronomy professor, and like talking about physics and how it works. So, and nature, like I would say nature would be like the unifying family value that came from both of those, the beauty of nature and the artistic side, and then also the beauty of nature from a scientific standpoint. And then being out in nature a lot, like taking us camping, like that was stuff that we did all the time for years and years and years. And I know that is why so much of my music draws from these natural images.
Yeah, especially astrophysics, particularly in terms of the sciences, right? That's the first one that caught my attention back in high school, because it also solves a lot of problems in my head, right? It is like, well, where does everything come from? It doesn't really answer, like, I think Hawking said, like, well, we really don't know what happened before the Big Bang, but like, it does solve a lot of kind of questions about like existential questions that one might have. And at the same time, it's very pretty in terms of like nebulae and galaxies and, all the kinds of cosmic objects you could possibly witness.
Yeah, I love that, like, thinking of science as art and art as science. Like, I love seeing them as almost the same thing, or finding so much art in like a night sky of constellations that someone's named, but like, look at it, it's beautiful. Or let's say the Northern Lights, which I've never seen, but it's on my bucket list. Like, that is something I want to paint. It's so beautiful, but it's science too. So like, I love that's the world I live in my music, is that intersection of art and science.
Yeah, and I do think that it is actually probably closer than we want to say it is, we being 21st century culture. In terms of like, I don't know, it's just that science is repeatable. That it's peer reviewed and repeatable. And art isn't. I guess that would be the only real kind of categorical difference between the two. And that, because really, like, when you are creating an experiment, it requires an immense amount of creativity to design and create and to think through like, if you are kind of trying to think through what's the word I'm looking for? Like, the way that relativity and quantum mechanics isn't really coherent together, or it isn't coherent together on a subatomic level. Like, if you want to try to think through, like, well, how do I figure out what the next step is, or what the next paradigm is, it requires a lot of creativity to try to think through the logic. That was the word I was looking for.
Yes.
The logic of that stuff.
Yes, I am completely in agreement with that.
So how did your parents meet?
They met through I think it was my dad's mom and my mom's aunt, or maybe it was the other way around, but the families knew each other. They were in college at Case Western Reserve in Ohio, and the aunt and the mom suggested that they meet, and they did. But my mom was like booked out for like 4 months with all these other dates. So my dad had to wait in line.
What was it, the 60s?
Yeah. So they've been married 58 years. They're almost 80. Yeah. And they live on San Juan Island up north of Seattle. So they're not too far. I'm actually going to go see them on Sunday.
Oh, nice. So they're from Ohio, or they're from that part of the country? My
dad grew up in Ohio. My mom grew up in Maryland and went to college in Ohio. And then my dad got his PhD at ITT in Chicago. And then they had my brother there. My mom was teaching and then later she got her master's in education. He got his PhD in physics, then got a job at Colorado College, where they moved to Colorado Springs and had me. And then we stayed there until my brother and I left for college, and they eventually moved out. And my brother's in Seattle. So we're all kind of Northwesterners now.
Mm-hmm. What brought them to Colorado Springs? Was it just like that's where he got a
job.
Teaching position?
Yeah.
Was it a good place to grow up? Like, what I guess this is when I ask that question, what I'm really asking, and I'll just go to the one I really want to know, is like, how do you think Colorado Springs formed you as a person?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. I would say the beautiful natural surroundings definitely had an impact, and because you've got this huge mountain, and it's Pikes Peak, sort of not looming over the city, but it's like kind of like this big thing. It's the big mountain that you always see. And then there's the Garden of the Gods, which are these red rocks that were revered by one of the native cultures that was there as a like spiritual realm. And people learned to rock climb there. I learned to rock climb there. And it's kind of like a dry, deserty world. And then to the other side, to the east, it's all just flat plains like Kansas. So there's a lot of sprawl. There's a lot of like right-wing conservatism, is that the word? There, and like the focus on this family religious right is there, but also you have like NASA, and you have like what is it? There's like a bomb, NORAD. There's like a bomb buried in the mountain, and then there's the Olympic Training Center, and then there's just like so many big weird things there. And then the college where my dad taught, which was like a little microcosm, like this small liberal outpost. And my mom was an educator too, school teacher. So it was culturally weird. Like I remember in high school, and I graduated in 92. There was the first gay group that was forming, and LGBTQ AI++ was just the gay group back then. And they went out, and then protesters were outside the front of the high school because they found out that the gays made a group. Like that's how hardcore it was in some ways, the right wing side back then. And it still is very divided. So I saw religion as like the dumbest thing ever, because my parents were like, this is so toxic, and then I met like as I grew up, I would meet, I met some nuns who were Catholic nuns who were like radical protesters
Right.
who would
Yeah.
like get arrested on, doing like radical peace work or protest work. I was like, what? That's a thing? Like nuns getting arrested? That's cool, or more, some of the sides of Christianity that are more like that, like direct action protest sides of it I hadn't heard of before. So it was kind of a strange lens on things, but I do feel like my parents had the biggest influence in terms of being so involved with our lives and so engaged with us and exposing us to my brother and I to so many different things. We did a lot of traveling. Like my dad had a sabbatical year where we traveled all around. I was 11. We traveled over the whole country in one of those Vanagon like hipster vans, and like visited every state. And then we went down to Mexico because he was teaching down there, and we went to Costa Rica, like that in that van, like kind of like hippie stuff in a way. And that, I think, and they took us traveling a lot. And like I remember when I was 16, they took us to England for like a trip through France and England, like summer trip, because they both had summers off. And my dad just drove all around England on the wrong side of the road. And I was like, that's cool. And then when I became a musician, I was like, well, I can do that. Dad did that. It's no big deal. Like first tour I did, I just drove on the wrong side, like because he had modeled that. Like they modeled adventure. And I think that led to my confidence in being a touring musician, which was such a grind for so long and still is, frankly, sometimes just like driving hours and hours and not a very comfortable lifestyle.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think there are other, I don't know what you would call them, predecessors, some things that kind of were foundational that you realize like in your artistic career, like, oh, I can see how when I was younger, this led to me being like X, Y, or Z?
I think possibly, I would say like overall that the like culture of achievement was hammered into me. So, and my brother was super talented at everything he did and still is. So, and everybody was like, thought he was the bee's knees and still do. So I always felt a little bit like, well, shit, I got to step up my game to keep up with this guy.
Oh, interesting.
In every way. Like physically, he was just like this great athlete. He like got straight A's without trying and went to Stanford. Like I had to study my ass off and didn't have the test scores for Stanford or a place like that. So I think trying to compete with him, even though he never competed with me, but I felt the need to match him, probably drove me for a long time. I don't feel that now, but I think it was in there.
Do you think that the fact that whatever came naturally to him, the fact that it didn't come naturally to you, pushed you in a different direction at all?
Probably. I mean, I just remember I thought I was going to become a geologist, which would have fallen into like more of the role of everybody else in my science type family. But then as I became more interested in songwriting, as soon as I started writing, I was like, I love this. This is so fun. And I think if I look clearly, I'm like, that's the root of the whole situation, is that I loved solving the puzzles of songs the first time I started doing it. Yeah. And from there, I saw, I think maybe intuitively at some level, that it was a mix of those sides of myself that I thought that just felt like natural. So the mixing of the art and the science mind.
Yeah. I understand very deeply that kind of like when you said solving the puzzle of a song, like there are just some moments where I'm just like fucking around on the guitar and I play a chord. I'm just like messing around. I don't even know, like I'm just putting my fingers wherever it feels like it might be fun to. And then I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. But what would be the next thing? And figuring out whatever that next thing is, having just like randomly putting my fingers down, there's something. And then using like knowing like, well, I do know I'm not just like, sorry, I'm not randomly putting my fingers down, but I'm like, I do know what the notes are. And then, but like that kind of like thing, is that what you mean? Like there's some pleasure in figuring out those kind of things.
Yeah. It's like basically puzzle solving. Like what's the next lyric? How is this? What's the story? Whether it's a lyric, there's so many problems. There's the lyrical problems to solve, and then there's melodic questions, and then there's rhythm, and there's tone, and there's execution and tempo. And I mean, there's chords and colors and bridges and structures and shapes, and like you have to make tons of decisions. But as soon as I started doing it, I thought it was really fun to make those decisions.
Yeah.
So then
I got
kept
3
doing
syllables. One of them's got to be, what do I do?
Yeah.
Did you know how weird Colorado Springs was? What a weird mishmash of different things it was when you were growing up? Or is it only as an adult in retrospect looking back?
I mean, my parents would talk about how the government didn't care that it was turning into a massive sprawl. And so they would write letters to the editor and like protest and try to get it so that we would have some kind of city planning. And then they would talk about, like, you would see the religious right, the presence of the religious right really strong, like, for example, with the protesters outside the school because of the gay group. And then, like, a friend of mine was training for the Olympics because she moved there to go to the Olympic Training Center. Mm-hmm. And so I could tell it was kind of odd that there was such a mishmash, but I don't think I had a real perspective on it because that was the only place I knew. And once I left, I was like, that place is so weird, but also it has a lot of really cool things going for it too. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't live there again, I don't think, but I had a good upbringing there.
Yeah. Do you think that weirdness got into you at all?
I don't think so. I mean, probably, I don't know. I feel like I'm just a weird mishmash of like people in my family and like our family culture, but possibly the town elements of the town culture seeped in. I'm not sure. What's
the weird mishmash of your family that you think that formed you?
Well, there's the high achieving side, and then there's the science side. There's tons of scientists, but then there's also a lot of Zen Buddhists / Tibetan Buddhists and like long-term meditators in my family. So curiosity about and appreciation of Eastern philosophies. And like one of my aunts married a Korean man and has 2 biracial kids. And my other cousin married a Tibetan man and has 2 biracial kids, and they go to Tibet. And so there's like an interest in mysticism and meditation on the one hand, and along with that, exploration of the arts. And then there's this like really advanced level, like astrophysics, science type people on the other side. And I think I don't know. I'm like a mix of them,
Did you spend a lot of time with your family, or what? Did you have friends? Like, what was the kind of like, who do you think had more of a influence on you?
I definitely had a boyfriend in high school who had a pretty big influence on me. And he was really interested in music and art, and but he had like this punk thing going on. He had a mohawk, but he was valedictorian, so he was kind of interesting guy. Lost track of him, but he definitely had an influence on like exposing me to different poetry and art and music. And my brother had a good influence on me in terms of showing me music because he's the older brother and he was into music. And my parents definitely were involved, but like I had friends who pushed the envelope way more than I did, like stealing and having sex early and doing lots of drugs. And I started experimenting with pot when I was like 14. I didn't have sex till I was like 18, but I guess like nowadays people are waiting longer. I don't know what's going on, but culturally things are happening later, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I did some stupid drinking and stuff, but yeah, I never really like went off the rails with that stuff. And the boyfriend I had in college was like pretty straight edge. So it wasn't, we weren't hanging out. Like I had a friend who fucking went off the rails with heroin and went and accidentally killed someone and was like in prison for 20 years. So that was around, like, especially in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, there was and is a lot of drug use.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, the people I was hanging out with in music, we're not that into it. So I never got that into it either. And
Yeah.
I'm, of course, grateful for that because I'm not straight edge, but I'm also just not much of a drug person or drinking person. And I think I just, I feel grateful I didn't fall into those kinds of groups or traps, or maybe it was that I didn't have that kind of like personality that wanted to escape myself that much, you know?
Yeah.
I kind of think what they're doing, and when they're doing those drugs, they're trying to have fun too. And sometimes that is fun, but when it becomes an addiction, it's trying to escape yourself.
Yeah. I neither wanted to. I had enough fun on my own, so I never bothered, and I never felt like escaping from either myself or my situation. So it never became a problem there, or I never wanted to even do it. So
are you just straight edge basically? Like, did you ever do anything?
No, I never did. I'm straight edge in the sense that like I'm also kosher because I'm vegetarian. So like I'm straight edge by just like default in the sense that like I don't X up my hands or anything like that. But like I also don't like alcohol, and I've never felt like doing any kind of like I'll take an Advil PM every once in a while.
Okay, got it.
To go to sleep.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's just never interesting. I found the world to be more interesting, and I've had more fun. Well, who knows? But like, I tend to have enough fun that I'm just like, I don't need anything else. I don't need anything to enhance the experience or to change my brain.
Yeah.
And I'm enough of a narcissist that I want whatever my brain is as it is right now to be the way it is.
Yeah.
So another thing I was thinking of was that you had heavy doses of the sublime when you were younger. What I mean by that is like the idea of the sublime, stop me if you know this. The only reason I'm saying is because like usually only if you've like really studied, only if someone studied philosophy, they're like, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But like when you are witness to so much like giant nature, I mean, literally giant, like stuff that like dwarfs you. Right. And I was thinking about your father studying the cosmos. So you have that in your life early on. You have nature early on. You have these trips that take you outside of Colorado Springs throughout the entire United States into Europe, right? Into Mexico. And you are just kind of getting heavy doses of all of this like natural beauty that the idea behind the sublime is that like your brain can't take in all this stuff, and that awe feeling that you get in response to the stuff, that's the sublime, right? And I get it in little doses, and I find it, and I wonder if because I only get in little doses, it's actually kind of painful a little bit to have that kind of like beauty and meaning, and I'm wondering if maybe that formed you in a certain way.
Another great question, which I hadn't thought about, but I would like to think so, because that would make me like able to, I would say, possibly access some of that feeling of being in the sublime from a young age and bring it through my art, you know? But yeah, why do you think you feel pain when you feel it?
Because I'm not used to it. I think it's like really like it's beautiful and it's inspiring, but it's also a little bit like too much sometimes. It's like too much capital T truth sometimes to like bear.
And so what was the last time you felt that? Like what brought up, was it like a nature thing or a music thing or a book thing, or
sometimes it's music. A book I've been reading. Do you ever read Charles Bowden? He was basically like a chronicler. I think did I use that right? Chronicler. Did I say that correctly?
I think so.
Of the border. So basically, he lived a lot of his life in the American Southwest, going between Juarez and I guess what's on the other side of that.
I'm not sure.
San Antonio, I don't know, whatever's on the other side of Juarez in the United States, right? He spent a lot of time documenting, and he wrote a book called Juarez, the Laboratory of the Future. And he is, I've described Charles Bowden as being something like Hemingway plus Viktor Frankl. Like,
cool.
Like, if that makes sense. So he's like a guy who like drinks and fucks, but also like writes deeply about the meaning of existence. And just the way he writes, there's a lot of like capital T truth in it. And it's sometimes difficult to bear because it's just like, oh yeah, that is what the history of America and the history of humanity has led to. And this is what our future is probably going to be. And it's tough to take that in. And
I see that.
it's the same feeling as when I'm out in nature. It's the same feeling as when I'm like I remember very specifically being at a wedding of one of my wife's friends, and they owned a lake house in Vermont, and the next day brunch was at this lake house, and just looking out this giant bay window onto the lake is the same kind of feeling of like terror and beauty all at the same time.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's almost like you feel tiny. You feel like dwarfed by the magnificence of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also like that's such a wonderful, it's a very complex mix of feelings. It's wonder, but it's also fear and foreboding, and I guess sometimes bordering on terror because we are so insignificant and could disappear in a flash of light any moment, you know?
And will.
Yeah.
Like, it's just
but could be today. Like that's the thing that we hardly ever think about, right? Is that tomorrow is promised to no one, and it could be today. So if we lived that way more, we would be more present and alive. I know I would be, but that's just like a lifelong path to try to stay in the moment, stay present, stay engaged. And
you think that. Yet I have my mortality very front and center, and I still will play Candy Crush and watch some shitty show on Netflix, fully knowing that this is limited. So I don't know if just being present is enough to. This is why I asked this, because meaningful activities, like I can't just spend all my time like in meaningful activities. It's too much. It is all that terror and beauty all wrapped up into that activity. And it's like, I can't, and I'm wondering if maybe you have more of a tolerance. I guess that's what I was looking for. Do you have more of a tolerance for that? Where you're like, yes, I can be out in nature for like, days, or and it doesn't, the terror isn't too much.
That's definitely true for nature, but not true for creativity. So I would not want to, I limit how much time I'm living in that place creating, because it's exhausting for me. And I mean, it's both. It's rejuvenating, but it's tiring. It just requires this intense amount of focus. And I have other things I like to do, like go on picnics with friends and take my kids swimming and, like ride my bike and meet a friend for coffee. So I limit those creative bursts to, I mean, sometimes I'll like have an extra weekend to myself and like go crazy making art for 12 hours, or either art or music. And I go through bursts of that, but overall I'm like more like just a kind of like a worker bee, just like plodding along, doing this and that, but entering that world sporadically, or just like for limited amounts of time in limited chunks of the year, like when I'm going through the cycle of an album, there's like the writing phase, which is where I do limited chunks of writing every day for like a year or two. And then there's the promotion then there's a whole other thing, like figuring out what the art's going to be like, and then the videos, and then the actual show and the performance, and then the tour. That's a whole other thing. So none of that time is like the creative, sublime state, although I have entered the sublime state performing, and that's a different right topic. But I can't perform all the time either. Like that needs to come in little bursts, otherwise I would get exhausted by that. So, but I think like I've noticed myself feeling resistant to writing words specifically lately, because I'm back from tour and like have a little downtime, but I'm like, I don't feel like writing songs. I do feel like writing instrumental music. I think I'll be doing more of that. But there's something about words that's annoying me right now. And I've noticed that like if I'm annoyed by an artistic thing, I'm just not going to do it. Like I'm not going to just force my way through the words problem. I mean, the words have always been the problem. That's the hardest part for me. But sometimes I'll get like really into writing lyrics, like write tons of lyrics in that like waking up in the middle of the night zone. And if I'm not in it, I don't really push it. I just say like, okay, well, you're not interested in words right now, but you are interested in this other stuff. So do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It seems like you are someone who is like pretty emotionally under control.
Yeah. I mean, I went through a really hard divorce and the pandemic, and I think I started drinking too much then. So now I don't really keep alcohol in the house, but I don't feel out of control with alcohol right now, but I did for a while. But I think that was fairly understandable given the circumstances of the pandemic divorce combo. But yeah, I go to therapy every other week. I love my therapist, and I, have done a lot of therapy in the last few years, and really feel. I noticed when I was on stage this last time playing, in some cases, big places in London or the UK. Well, big for me is like 800 people, but I was just completely grounded and calm on stage. And I think that can be attributed to me having come through quite a difficult time and realizing like, I'm good. I'm fine. I don't need anyone up here on stage, and here's the show. Like self-acceptance, it's happening more and more.
Were you always like that? Were you like that? Were you kind of like in control of your emotions when you were younger too?
I was always emotionally pretty regulated, but I was terrified to perform. I had like debilitating stage fright from day one. And that is what kept me going, actually. Like, I was like so used to being sort of like my brother, we're like, try something. Oh, I'm great at this. And I was like, try something, writing songs, great at it. Try something, performing, sucks super hard. Lost control of my hands, lost control of my voice, like everything shaking, cannot execute, like classic stage fright. But I pushed through again and again and again and again. And sometimes it still creeps up on me. It's not my natural state to be performing, but I do enjoy it now. And I can find, recently I have started to find a place of very deep calm and groundedness on stage, which is new and very gratifying, frankly.
Well, what made you want to go into writing music and performing? If I'm only asking this because you had said earlier, like if I'm not feeling writing lyrics, I just will do something else. I'll do something. I won't do that. And I know that myself, if there's something that is like very painful or something like that, I just push away from it and ignore it. I won't go in that direction. It's very like gut level, instinctual, lizard brain type stuff, right? I'm wondering, like, I mean, we're right at the end. I guess I'll just ask all of the questions because I think they're all connected to each other, and you can let me know how you feel about it. But like, I'm curious, did you have a specific ambition to go into geology or the sciences, or was it like, I'm going to do this because this will please my family? And then how did it feel when you found music and writing music? And well, I'll ask the last one. I'll just leave you with that, and then I have one last one.
Yeah, I think I went into geology to please them, but also I liked geology. And then I recently was reading through one of the only journals I've kept, because I've always kept journals, but I tossed them all with a Marie Kondo burst, except for I saved two. And one of them I was reading the other day, and it was like me at 21, and it was like, I want to be a writer. And I was like, I'm going to, it was very clear. And I'd already been writing songs for like 4 years at that point. And so I just declared that, and then I did it in terms of songwriting. And then what was the other question?
I was just wondering about like your specific ambition. Like you said at 17, I'm going to do this, but did you have like an existential kind of like, did you make that kind of existential decision?
I did, because I was in the middle of a desert in China at that time. And I was like supposed to be doing this geology trip, but I was also supposed to be this translator because I spoke Chinese, and it was this very strange trip. And I brought my guitar, and I was just like basically like hanging out at this camp by myself all day with sand dunes all around me for like 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, like, I don't want to do geology at all. I want to write songs. And then I was just, that was kind of an epiphany, and it's written in the little book.
And I think that leads right into my last question, which was like, you mentioned earlier that your parents brought you up in a kind of like existentially open household, I guess I'll say it, where you talked about like these kinds of topics and meaningfulness and living a meaningful life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of curious, like, what did that mean when you were a kid? And then how did that form you as an adult, or how did that come back into your life as an adult?
I don't remember us specifically talking about meaning. But I think it was implied in like the ways that they showed us how to be in the world and the meaning that they found in their world.
Can you give me an example of that, please?
Like my mom just valuing education and people expressing themselves through art, and my dad valuing education and people thinking hard about scientific problems, and like both of them valuing getting us out into nature and observing nature and enjoying nature. And so I think along those lines, like I tried to emulate them in my parenting with my kids, getting them out into the world. And like I brought them on tour to England on this last trip, and I want them to see alternatives to drone jobs or, sitting at a desk job.
When you made that existential decision that you like, I want to write songs, was there something about that you found more meaningful than kind of following a like straight scientific path?
I think it was rooted in that the geology we were studying was very abstract, and I couldn't find deep enough meaning in the study of it, because it was sort of like structural geology where we were looking at the fault lines and the way these mountains were moving, but it was very esoteric. And I was like, I want to do something that's more from the heart and practically useful. And I mean, it took me a long time to get any songs that were good, but I do feel that my songs have been useful to people. And that's so gratifying. And that's sometimes why I like going out to the merch table after shows, because people will tell me, like, you got me through 10 years of heartbreak, or, I've been listening to you for 15 years and it's been like the soundtrack to my life. And that's an intense thing to hear, but it's amazing. Yeah. And it makes me feel like there's meaning to what I'm doing that's beyond what it brings to me. And it's not just like I'm making this thing that goes out into the void and no one ever hears it and there's no reaction,
Yeah. Do you think you were seeking those kinds of connections? Because you could have just gone into a different science, right? Or you could have like sought out maybe a geology a way of studying geology that fit with what you were looking for.
Like a more practically applicable one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there was just something where I was just so intrigued by that kind of bizarre thing that happens when you come up with creative ideas with words and music that just like really hooked me in from very early on, and really hasn't let me go. It's just like such a strange mystery, and it's a hard thing to teach, but it's really fun to try to help people find their way through it too.
Awesome. Laura, I know you need to get back to relieve your babysitter. So
yes.
Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate
thank you.
It.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, bye.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh 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 bye.